What if you could select a new reality just by changing your mind? What if the life you're living is only one of countless timelines, and the key to switching tracks is an invisible shift that can alter everything almost instantly? Here's the part most people miss. Real change rarely looks dramatic. It's usually silent, private, almost unnoticeable until one day your life starts rearranging itself around the person you've quietly become. Have you ever felt truly stuck? Not a temporary rut, but a deep sense that every day feels like another shade of the same gray. A place where your career stalls, your creative energy fades, and life seems to run on a loop. For most of my life, I saw the world through a rational, skeptical lens. I believed in cause and effect, in tangible results earned through effort. The idea that you could think your way into a better life manifestation. The law of attraction felt like a spiritual shortcut, comforting, maybe, but unrealistic. Then desperation dissolved certainty. Late one night, buried in articles and podcasts, I found myself at an intersection I never expected to explore, where consciousness meets quantum mechanics. The ideas were strange, unsettling, yet impossible to ignore. The observer effect, many worlds theory, wave function collapse. These weren't mystical metaphors. They were physicists, some of the brightest minds alive, grappling with the nature of reality itself. They were pointing to the same unsettling idea sages have whispered for centuries: reality isn't fixed, it's participatory, and the observer changes the observed. That's when a quiet, dangerous thought surfaced. What if this isn't just a metaphor? What if the universe operates by laws you can consciously interact with? The skeptic in me resisted. But the part of me that felt like it was drowning asked a simpler question. What is there to lose? So I began an experiment. For 90 days, I suspended disbelief. I lived as if these principles were true, not as philosophy, but as a practical method to create one specific, highly improbable change in my life. I documented everything, fully expecting to expose the illusion. What happened instead defied every explanation I trusted. This is the story of that experiment, the framework I used, and the results that didn't just change my career, but completely rewired how I understand reality. Before we get into the experiment itself, we need to step into a different way of seeing reality. Not to master physics, and certainly not to abandon common sense, but to borrow a few ideas powerful enough to disrupt the old story you've been living inside. Think of this as installing a temporary operating system, one you'll test, not blindly believe. The first idea is something called the observer effect. At the quantum level, particles like electrons don't behave like solid objects. Before measurement, they exist in what physicists call superposition, a spread of probabilities rather than a single, definite state. Only when the system is measured does one outcome appear. In plain terms, the act of observation changes how the system behaves. Now, it's important to be precise here. Mainstream physics is clear on this point. The observer effect applies to subatomic systems, not to careers, relationships, or bank accounts. There is no scientific proof that your thoughts collapse reality in the same way a measuring device collapses a wave function. But for the sake of this experiment, I treated it as an instruction rather than a literal claim. What if much of life exists in an unfixed state until attention, decision, and action give it shape? What if possibilities remain open longer than we think, and what closes them isn't fate, but how we consistently engage with them? Not magically, practically. The second idea comes from the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett. It suggests that every possible outcome of a quantum event exists in parallel timelines. One where the particle went left, one where it went right. Nothing collapses reality, simply branches. Again, this is a speculative interpretation. It's elegant, controversial, and untestable in any direct way. But as a framework for change, it offers a radical reframe. If multiple futures already exist, then creating change isn't about forcing something new into being. It's about aligning with a version of reality that already exists. Like tuning a radio. You don't create the signal, you match it. From that perspective, jumping timelines isn't science fiction. It's identity alignment. The version of you who gets the result already exists. The question is whether your current state matches that track or contradicts it. This is where most people unknowingly cancel themselves out. They say they want one future, but emotionally rehearse another. They aim forward with their goals, while their nervous system stays anchored in fear, doubt, or past failure. The signal is mixed, and mixed signals don't resolve into anything. That leads to the third idea, coherence. Research from institutes like HeartMath shows that the heart and brain generate measurable electromagnetic activity. When your thoughts and emotions are aligned, often during states like calm focus, gratitude, or compassion, the system becomes more ordered, more efficient, more stable. This state is called coherence. Now again, let's stay grounded. There is no established evidence that coherence directly alters external events through a quantum field. That leap hasn't been proven. But coherence does change something undeniably real, your perception, your decision-making, your behavior, and your ability to sustain focus without burnout. And here's the subtle shift this experiment was built on. What if coherence isn't about sending a signal to the universe, but about eliminating internal contradiction when your thoughts say one thing, your emotions say another, and your actions say a third? Reality reflects that fragmentation. But when those three begin to align, even quietly, your choices stabilize, your attention sharpens, your reactions change. And once your behavior changes consistently, outcomes follow. Not instantly, not dramatically, but inevitably. This reframes the entire idea of manifestation. It's not about believing harder. It's not about positive thinking. And it's definitely not about waiting for signs. It's about becoming internally consistent. So the working theory of this experiment became simple. Reality may contain more potential paths than we realize. Attention selects direction, emotion stabilizes it, and identity sustains it long enough for results to appear. Not because the universe is obeying you, but because you've stopped fighting yourself. And here's the puzzle that follows from this. If change really begins as a quiet internal shift, why do so many people try for years and stay stuck? Because they keep looking for noise. They look for evidence before coherence has stabilized. They announce the change before it's encoded. They dig up the seed to see if it's growing. The shift doesn't fail because it's weak. It fails because it's interrupted. And that insight set the stage for the experiment itself, a structured way to define a destination, stabilize an internal signal, and recognize progress without chasing proof. With that framework in place, I started the experiment, not to prove quantum physics, not to bend reality with my thoughts, but to see what would happen if I stopped living in contradiction with myself. I committed to 90 days, no shortcuts, no skipping steps. Just a simple, repeatable protocol I could follow, even when doubt showed up, which it did. Constantly. I broke it into 3 parts. Step 1. Define and embody the destination. The observer takes aim. The first mistake most people make when they try to change their lives is being vague. They say things like, "I want to be successful," or "I want a better life." But if attention is the selecting mechanism, then vague attention selects nothing. So I didn't define a goal. I defined a moment. Not a future in general, but a single, ordinary scene from a future timeline where the change had already happened. Something specific enough for my mind and body to recognize as real. I didn't write, "I want to be a successful screenwriter." Instead, I wrote a one-page description of waking up in a different apartment, the quality of light in the room, the smell of coffee, opening my laptop to an email from my agent with the subject line, "Greenlit." But the most important detail wasn't visual. It was emotional. Not excitement, not adrenaline, but a calm, grounded sense of inevitability. A feeling of course. As if nothing miraculous had happened, only something that finally made sense. The kind of feeling your nervous system recognizes as familiar, not aspirational. Here's the paradox most people miss. You don't create change by wanting a future. You create change by rehearsing the identity that already lives there. This is where embodiment comes in. Not imagination alone, but lived, repeatable behavior, every day. I asked myself a simple question. What would the version of me who already lives in this timeline do next? Not in theory, in practice. That version of me didn't endlessly scroll. He wrote, he studied, he reached out to people he felt unqualified to email. He invested time and money in his craft, even when fears said, "Wait." At first, it felt like acting. Imposter syndrome was constant. But this wasn't fake it till you make it. It was something quieter and more precise. Live it until your nervous system stops arguing with it. Each decision became a vote not for a result, but for an identity. And identities aren't formed by intention. They're formed by repetition. And over time, those votes added up. Step 2. Vibrate at the new frequency, tuning the channel to a parallel world. Defining the destination wasn't enough. The second practice was the energy work. If the many worlds interpretation was my guide, I knew I had to tune my radio to the frequency of that greenlit screenwriter timeline, not by forcing belief, but by stabilizing the internal state that would naturally belong to that version of me. My primary tool for this was a non-negotiable daily practice of cultivating brain-heart coherence. Every morning, before checking my phone, I practiced a 15-minute coherence technique. I would sit upright, place a hand on my heart, and breathe slowly and deeply, imagining my breath flowing in and out of my heart center. The simplicity of the practice was intentional. I wasn't trying to induce a special experience only to quiet the system enough to feel clearly. As I did this, I would intentionally evoke the feeling I had defined in step 1, that quiet, solid satisfaction. I wasn't just visualizing an outcome. I was generating the feeling of the reality before it had arrived. Not excitement, not intensity, just a steady sense of this is already real. The goal was to make this feeling my default state. This was the hardest part. The old timeline has a powerful gravitational pull. Doubt, fear, and frustration constantly surfaced. A rejection email would send my energy plummeting. And I quickly learned that this wasn't failure. It was the system revealing how deeply the old pattern was wired. The key, I discovered, was not to fight these feelings, but to notice them and consciously return to the new frequency. It was like tuning an instrument. A rejection would knock the string out of tune, and my job was to gently, deliberately, bring it back to the right note, the feeling of already there. This daily, hourly retuning was the core of the work. Not dramatic, not visible, just consistent. I was training my body and my energy field to resonate with a future that had not yet appeared in my physical world. Or, at the very least, I was training my nervous system to stop anchoring itself to the past while waiting for the future to arrive. Step 3. Hunt for the echoes. Recognizing the resonance. The final step was about perception. If I was truly shifting my resonance, the theory suggested I wouldn't see the final outcome right away. Instead, I would begin to notice echoes, small reflections of alignment in my outer world, not miracles, but subtle signals. What I half-jokingly called glitches in the matrix synchronicities. Meaningful coincidences, moments where timing felt unusually precise. To track this, I started a synchronicity log. I wrote down any event, no matter how small, that felt aligned with the direction I was moving. The goal wasn't to prove anything mystical. It was to train my perception to notice patterns of coherence, instances where my internal focus and external circumstances seemed to meet. And then, it began. At first, it was subtle. I'd think of a specific director, and his film would be on TV that night. The number 11, which I'd randomly chosen as a personal marker for my new timeline, started appearing in places that caught my attention not constantly, but often enough to feel statistically curious. Then the glitches became more pronounced. About a month in, I was struggling with a scene. That same afternoon, I received an out-of-the-blue email from a college friend I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. He was now a consultant in the exact field I was writing about. A single conversation with him unlocked the scene completely. Another time, a script reader told me my ending needed a twist similar to the one in The Usual Suspects. That very night, my streaming service recommended that exact film on my homepage despite the fact that I hadn't searched for it or watched anything related. The skeptic in me immediately pushed back. Confirmation bias, it said. And maybe that's true, but here's what mattered. The effect of these moments was real. Each coincidence didn't make me passive or dependent on signs. It did the opposite. It stabilized my commitment. It made the acting as if in step 1 feel less like pretending, and the emotional regulation in step 2 feel less like effort. In other words, the synchronicities weren't instructions. They were feedback. They reinforced coherence. The more consistently I embodied the new timeline internally through behavior, emotional regulation, and focus, the more these aligned moments seemed to appear. Whether that was the universe responding, or my perception sharpening as my internal state stabilized. The result was the same, a powerful feedback loop. Alignment made the work sustainable. Sustainability made the shift real. And that loop, quiet, reinforcing, and largely invisible to anyone else, is what allowed the experiment to continue long enough for something much larger to happen. For the first 60 days, the experiment was a series of subtle shifts, encouraging synchronicities, and a lot of internal work. I felt different, more focused, more hopeful. But my external reality was fundamentally unchanged. The old timeline held fast. Nothing dramatic happened, and that, I later realized, was the point. And then, in the final 30 days, the resonance became undeniable. It wasn't a single event, but a rapid cascade of events that felt like a dam breaking. Not because I forced anything, but because enough internal pieces had finally stopped contradicting each other. It started with one of those scary emails from Step 1 sent 6 weeks earlier to a producer I admired. I had written it off as unanswered. Then, on day 67, a short reply appeared. Interesting idea. Send the script, a small response. Easy to miss. But it landed with perfect timing. I sent the version I had just restructured based on the movie glitch. 2 weeks later, another email. I love this. I have a few notes. Can we talk? We talked. His notes were brilliant and perfectly aligned with my vision. He said if I could turn around a new draft in 2 weeks, he'd show it to his boss. What struck me most wasn't the opportunity, it was how natural the conversation felt. As if we were already on the same wavelength. For those 2 weeks, the writing flowed with an ease I hadn't felt in years. It felt less like I was creating something new and more like I was transcribing something that already existed. There was no struggle to believe. The work simply moved. I was living completely in the frequency I had been cultivating for months. I submitted the new draft on day 88. For 2 days, silence. The old voices of doubt came roaring back. This was the real test, not of talent, but of coherence. I spent nearly all of days 89 and 90 practicing the coherence breathing from step 2 just to hold the frequency, to stay in that feeling of quiet satisfaction. Not to make something happen, but to avoid slipping back into the old state while waiting. On the evening of day 90, my phone rang. It was the producer. He said, "Don't change a word. We're buying it." And just like that, it felt like the timeline had jumped. The email I had imagined in my journal was now in my inbox. The scene I had crafted in my mind had collapsed into physical reality. The life that once felt impossibly distant was now my own. To the outside world, it looked sudden. To me, it felt inevitable. So we come to the core question, did I actually hack the quantum field and jump to a parallel universe? Or did I simply execute a masterful act of self-fulfilling prophecy? Let's be intellectually honest. The scientific consensus is clear. The observer effect describes measurement at a subatomic level, not how thoughts influence careers. The many worlds interpretation remains a speculative, untestable theory. The idea that consciousness itself triggers the collapse is a fringe interpretation that most physicists have abandoned. The synchronicities can be explained by confirmation bias, or what psychologists call the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. None of this violates science by acknowledging those explanations. It's entirely possible I didn't literally manipulate reality with my mind. But here is the truth I am left with. The truth that has become the new foundation of my life on a practical level. It doesn't matter. Whether this framework is a literal description of reality or a powerful psychological metaphor, it produced a tangible, life-altering result. Not suddenly, but inevitably, through sustained internal alignment. The quantum frame was the most effective tool I have ever found to change my beliefs. By changing my beliefs, I changed my focus. By changing my focus, I changed my emotions. By changing my emotions, I changed my actions. And my actions, inevitably, changed my life. No mystery required, just consistency. This experiment didn't hack physics. It hacked the operating system of my own mind. Acting as if, bypassed the inner critic that said I wasn't good enough. Tuning my frequency taught me how to regulate my emotional state, breaking an addiction to doubt. Hunting for echoes rewired my brain to look for evidence of success instead of proof of failure. None of these steps were dramatic, but together, they were decisive. The great takeaway is not that we are wizards bending the universe to our will, but something far more profound and accessible. We are the architects of our inner world. And our inner world is the blueprint for our outer world. The power doesn't lie in changing the universe. It lies in triggering an invisible shift within yourself. So here's the invitation. You don't have to believe any of this literally. You don't have to adopt a new worldview. You only have to test one thing. Suspend your skepticism for just 30 days. Define your timeline. Embody the feeling of its fulfillment. And look for the evidence that it is on its way. Call it quantum physics. Call it neuroscience. Call it focused intention. The name doesn't matter. Just try it. Because you might just discover that the only thing separating you from the life you desire is the story you've been telling yourself about why you can't have it.